Hi, this is Joy at Pine Quilt Shop. Today we're going to talk about how to prepare applique shapes using interfacing so that you can actually flip the edges of your applique shapes under and have a nice finished edge instead of a raw edge. And it ends up kind of almost looking like you turn the edge under by hand as a needle turn technique, except you do this with your sewing machine. So the first thing that you will do is to take a lightweight interfacing. The interfacing that I like to use, my favorite, is the sew-in interfacing from Lori Holt. It's a nice lightweight interfacing, but it has enough body to it to give your applique shapes a nice crisp edge. And you will take your interfacing, lay it on top of your applique pattern, and trace around the shape. Now your pattern needs to be not reversed with this technique. If it is reversed, flip your applique pattern upside down and you'll need to probably use a light box then to trace the shapes, but it needs to be not reversed. I like to trace it with a friction pen because I like to use something that will disappear when I iron it, and I want to have a marking tool that's easy to get rid of. So I use my friction pen generally for this, and I'll trace around the shape on my interfacing. The next thing that you'll do is to take your interfacing shape and you will stack it right side up on top of the right side of your fabric. So you're putting the right side of the fabric up and you're putting the right side of your interfacing up. And then you will take and sew around the shape. Now you can see I used red thread so you guys could see it. You can see that I've sewn slightly outside the line, and I do that so that when I turn the shape it comes out true to size, because you'll lose a little bit in that seam allowance. That's just kind of a naturally occurring thing when you sew. So you're going to want to have it's sewn a little bit outside the line. Now normally to do that stitching I'm going to use a neutral colored thread. I used red because I wanted you to be able to see it, but use a neutral color thread or match your thread color up to the color of your applique fabric. I set my stitch length to 2.0 millimeters because I want a shorter stitch so it's easy to navigate through those curves and corners on my applique. When I have my shape sewn, the next thing I'm going to do is to trim it. I like to use a pinking shears for that because it helps with the curves, and I generally try to trim so that the outer part of my pinking is about 1/4 of an inch away and the inner part is about 1/8 of an inch away from my stitched line. And I will go ahead and trim all the way around the shape. And when I get to the end here, I'm not going to worry because I'm going to show you a different way to trim a pointed end like that. But for the rest of the shape, the pinking shears will work wonderfully. Now for an end like that I'm going to actually trim across flat because I want that straight. I want to really minimize the fabric that I have at that point. Now if you have any sharp inner curves, we don't on this, but if you had any sharp inner curves, you may need to clip those with a scissors, and you want to just kind of clip right up to the thread. We don't have any curves on this so that are sharp enough to need to be worried about, but if you had something like a heart, that V in the heart would need to be snipped with the scissors in addition to what you did with the pinking shears. So after you have it trimmed, we're going to go ahead and cut the interfacing side of the shape. So I'm going to just get in here a little bit with my scissors. I have a nice sharp pointed scissors so I can kind of get into the interfacing and trim. And I will go ahead and trim that shape. Be careful not to cut through your fabric, but go ahead and trim the shape. Now we're ready to turn it, and I like to flip it over to the fabric side, and I use something called a fabric folding pen. It has a highly concentrated fabric softening agent in it, and I will go ahead and just go around my stitching line. I like to get just kind of on my stitching line or slightly inside it. And I will go ahead around my shape with that fabric softening agent because I find that it really helps to get it to turn and stain nicely. And at this point, I'm ready to turn my piece. So I'm going to flip it right side out using that slit that I cut in the inner facing. When you are kind of have it roughed out here with your hand, then I will usually use a turning tool. And when I go to use my turning tool, I want to make sure that I'm putting pressure on the fabric. So I don't want to be up here putting pressure on the inner facing. I want to get underneath that seam allowance and put pressure on the fabric. That is the best place to turn it out. I like to use the Clover point to pointer. It has a nice heel that is great for sweeping through the curves. So I will sweep through the curves on the sides here with that piece. And like I said, make sure you're putting pressure on the fabric. For the end of the leaf, the pointy end, I'm going to go to the pointy end of my point to point turner. And again, be careful to put the pressure on the fabric, not the inner facing. You want to keep it on the fabric side. The fabric is tougher than your inner facing, and that turned out nicely. And for a curve like this, it's just a little bit too sharp for the heel on my point to point turner, so then I usually go to my expert point and press tool, and I like to use that ball point for some of those tighter curves, because again, it really gets in there nicely and opens them up. And at this point in time, we have our shape turned and it is ready to press. I generally press first from this side, from the interfacing side. That interfacing can be pressed on. And I like to have just a tiny little bit of the fabric showing. I'm going to come over onto my whiteboard because I think it's maybe a little bit easier to see it here. So I like to have just a little bit of fabric on that side. So you can see, if you look at the interfacing slit, I have the slit overlapped slightly because I want to draw that fabric in a hair, because I don't want to have interfacing showing on the front side. And at this point in time, I am ready to go ahead and press this applique shape, and it is ready to use in my quilt. And it has a beautiful finished edge, no raw edges, and I very easily turned that seam under. So that is how to prepare your applique shapes using interfacing. You can find the items that I showed on our website at redpinequiltshop.com.